right, welcome everyone. I call this work session of the Loveland Board of Education to order at 6:02 p.m. Give a roll call, please.
Reverend Eilert.
Here.
Mrs. Jaranek.
Here.
Mrs. Mangan.
Here.
Dr. Swetchenow.
Here.
Mrs. Washburn.
Here.
Thank you. Next we have the agenda before us that was put out the end of last week. Any changes to the agenda? We have a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Jaranek.
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan.
Yes.
Dr. Swetchenow.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Reverend Eilert.
Yes. Thank you. Minutes from our last meeting. And those were online. Did you see, by the way, John, that one of the new actions is that we can, well, you guys assume we'll talk about that when you have your policy meeting, but one of the potential future actions is that we can approve minutes only at the work sessions. We wouldn't have to do them at only at the business meetings. We wouldn't have to do that at the work session.
You said can or
Can.
like
It was
it's
something
only
that was-
permissible then?
I did
or-
see that. It would be, we'd have to look at how we're delineating and how we're actually noticing these meetings, because even though it's a work session, it's really technically a regular meeting because we put it in our organizational meeting. So I think
Okay.
we just have to look at how we notice.
All right.
But yeah, that's good information.
All right, any additions, corrections to the minutes as presented?
Nope.
All right, then we have a motion to approve the minutes from the
moved.
September 17th meeting, sorry.
Still so moved.
Good, thank you. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Mangan.
Yes.
Dr. Swetchenow.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Reverend Eilert.
Yes.
Mrs. Jaranek.
Yes.
Excellent. Which I probably should have saved that last comment for this first then board discussion item, talking about OSBA policy update, the process. Again, there are things that come to us from the state that part of legislation that then affects board policies and obviously other best practice things and so forth that we'll consider. So, John, why don't you take that on? By the way, for those who are watching, Mr. Broadwater is up in Columbus with other, what's the meeting that they're at?
BASA.
So they're not present tonight, but we are in capable hands of Mr. Espy to lead us through our agenda today.
Yeah, thank you, President Eilert. Just looking at the policy, the new process with going to OSBA is they release quarterly updates, and I believe that you're seeing those quarterly updates come to your email. However, it can be a little bit overwhelming when you're seeing all the different policies that are being brought forth. So what I did was create a policy update sheet, Google Sheet that I've shared with you. And what it does is it looks at the actual recommended policy that's linked under the policy in the far left column. And then it talks about whether it's a board regulation or a policy, and then the description of it, and then also the release over to the right, and then some tracking in the middle to just keep track of where we are in terms of the project management of getting those not only approved by the board or read by the board, then approved and then posted to the OSBA website. So we're working through that process. I went through training about 2 weeks ago, and so I'm going to be the one that's going to be communicating with OSBA. Mike and I will obviously be talking, and then also bringing in anyone else that those policies would be driven to or affect. So any questions on this process? I just wanted to kind of put this together and make sure it's easy to follow in terms of organization of what needs to be done.
I really like it, so thank you.
You're welcome.
And
Sometimes.
just that we're going to have kind of regular, I'm the liaison with the board for now at least, between the administration and the board for policy. So we're going to have regular updates where we meet, and then I'll just make sure that all of us stay informed as to what's happening here. And obviously you do that too.
Yeah.
And you guys are meeting before our next business meeting.
Correct.
Right?
Friday.
Yeah.
10 a.m. And so I have most of the, there are some that like graduation requirements where our graduation requirements are actually a little bit more tailored to the district than what they put out. So it's making sure we get everything that's recommended but not overwrite things that are really important to to Loveland and the policies that already exist.
Great.
Great.
Any other questions?
Can't wait for that meeting.
About that?
Thank you. What to do when you have a Friday afternoon
I know,
off, that's
right.
very exciting.
Policy. Where's Kathy when we need her?
Yeah.
Speaking of John Ames consulting contract, maybe a Kathy Lawrence consulting contract would be appropriate for us to discuss in the future.
She would probably love it.
All right. There's no other discussion about that then. We can move on to our next agenda item. This is a contract that's presented in terms of continuing with John Ames' retirement to continue to have him be able to come back and do consulting with us on issues on an as-needed basis. Mr. Espy, do you have anything to share about the contract?
I was able to touch base with Mr. Broadwater and Mr. Collier, just to look through the contract. It essentially it has a 5-hour limit per week on it. And then the people that could essentially engage Mr. Ames to come in would be Mr. Broadwater, Mr. Collier, or Mr. Bryant. So it's pretty self-explanatory in terms of,
I can't remember, do we have a time limit on it?
Like an end date or something?
It's just,
I believe it's just this year, yeah, it's July
Yeah.
31st, which is
It is, yeah, it's
typical
number
of
two,
a,
Mhm.
typical of a administrative contract.
Mr. Bryant is here as well. Any comments from you on the proposal that?
For the most part, it's going to be HVAC consulting. He was here when most of our systems were installed, and things that might take us several hours, he can, in a phone call, tell us, try this. So, very valuable on our end.
That's helpful, thanks. Any other questions on the contract that's before us? And can we have, was that?
nope, she said no.
Okay. Can we have a motion then to approve the employment contract as presented?
So moved.
Second.
And roll call, please.
Dr. Swetchino?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Reverend Eiler?
Yes.
Mrs. Chernick?
Yes.
Mrs. Mingus?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. All right, and then the other piece of business we have here is this payment in lieu of transportation. Again, can you want to share a little bit about
Sure,
this?
there are certain students that we deem impractical in terms of transportation just because of the low numbers that might go to a specific school or where they're located. So this is a business practice that we typically utilize every year. Sometime, you might remember last year, there were a couple that I brought to you at the end, just to make sure that we were able to pay those families. So I anticipate that there'll be a few more of these throughout the year, but this is the first round for fiscal year '25. And essentially what happens too is these are the contracts, and then after the year, we make the payment once we verify that the student attended that school.
All right, are there questions about this list? I'm trying to remember how this compares to previous years in terms of numbers.
It's less right now, but I do anticipate
Feels
a
like,
lot
yeah.
more.
Okay.
Have we set a cutoff date for applying for that in the past?
We have not, but I'm working with Gary Stadronsky. We're actually working on kind of revamping that process and getting some forms updated, so kind of stay tuned on that. But
Do other school districts typically have a cutoff date?
yes, I mean, there's just it's essentially a process because it's really hard for us to plan and budget for this if we find out after the fact that someone, really qualified for this. So
Makes sense.
just essentially creating a process to follow.
And then this is dumb on my part, but that administrative content has students' names, so that doesn't roll over into the public content of the meeting later.
No, I typically keep it in there because it's got student names. Although I do believe we're actually able to post the student names because of what this is, but I still like erring on the side of caution and putting in
Sounds
the
good.
administrative.
Great. All right, any further questions on the list as presented to us? Then we have a motion then to approve the contract as presented.
So moved.
Second. Blocking you guys out today?
Just want to stay on.
There's only 2 more things to vote on.
Have her roll call, please.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Reverend Eiler,
Yes.
Mrs. Jernick,
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan.
Yes.
Dr. Swetchner.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, then we are then ready to move into executive session. We are moving into executive session pursuant to ORC Section 121.22G1, the employment and compensation of a public employee. So we will go into executive session, have discussion, and then we will come back and have potentially some action prior to our closing of the meeting. And so we'll stop the taping now and then come back and begin the tape again at the end of our session. So do we have a motion to move into executive session at 6:14 p.m.?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Reverend Eiler,
Yes.
Mrs. Jernick,
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan.
Yep.
Dr. Swetchner.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes. Yep.
All right, we're in at 6:14.
All right, thank you. All right, we've concluded our work in our executive session. Do we have a motion to end the executive session and come back into the full meeting?
So moved.
Second. I don't think you do anything.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Jernick,
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan.
Yes.
Dr. Swetchner.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Reverend Eiler.
Yes. All right, and 7:16 p.m., we've returned to regular session of the board here. And coming out of our executive session, we have a couple of actions to take. First of all, I'd like to request a motion to amend the agenda to add an addendum to the treasurer's employment contract as presented.
So moved.
Second. Yeah, we're
Roll
almost
call,
there.
please.
Reverend Eiler,
Yes.
Mrs. Jernick,
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan.
Yes.
Dr. Swetchner.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Thank you. So we had the discussion, review with Mr. Espy and talked about this initial not quite year of his tenure with us and how pleased we are with the work that he has done, and look forward to years in the future as well, and continuing to work with Mr. Espy as the treasurer. So many accomplishments that have taken place in this last year already, and just thrilled to have the expertise that he has here in our district. And so I'd like to request a motion to approve the addendum to the treasurer's contract as
So
presented.
moved.
And I will second.
All right, and this addendum will be on board docs tomorrow. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Reverend Eiler,
Yes.
Mrs. Jernick,
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan.
Yes.
Dr. Swetchner.
Yes.
Just like to say thank you to the board, and I appreciate your belief in me, and it's been a pleasure to work with you, and I just want to say thank you for believing in me.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thanks for your hard work.
That concludes our business for tonight. One announcement: we are planning to make a change to our regular business meeting for October. It was originally scheduled for the 15th of October, and we'll be moving that to the 22nd of October. So that will allow Mr. Broadwater to be with us at our October meeting, and all of our business can still be completed at that time. we'll send out a notice for that meeting following this one. So if there is no additional comments, then I think we can entertain a motion to adjourn. Mrs. Jaranek, would you like to make?
I would love to.
I already said it.
I already said it.
Did Eileen, was that a second?
It was a first.
Lynn's gonna have to second that.
I can second.
Okay, all right,
As
all
long
right.
as it is an Eric mission, will be accomplished.
All in favor?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned at 7:19.